Hello and welcome. UVA Speaks is a podcast of Lifetime Learning, a division of the Office of Engagement at the University of Virginia. Lifetime Learning brings the knowledge and expertise of UVA's faculty to the university's alumni, friends, and families. My name is Susan Lynch, and I am the Associate Director of Lifetime Learning at the University of Virginia's Office of Engagement. This podcast features Jess Reia, an assistant professor of data science in the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia. Professor Reia is interested in the untold stories in our data sets and how to meaningfully include communities rarely heard in data policy decision-making processes. They work primarily on topics of data justice, urban governance, and technology policy transnationally. For the past decade, their research and advocacy agenda has focused on fostering dialogues between academia, government, and civil society in 3 countries: Brazil, Canada, and the United States. In this podcast, Professor Reia will talk with us about smart cities. So thank you, Professor, for speaking with me today.
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great, thank you. So first, can you define what is a smart city?
Yes, and that's a really tricky question because we do not have a single definition for smart cities. What we're trying to frame is the relationship between urban spaces and technology. And often we think this is really new, like shiny new devices and internet and data. But we can think about technology in cities way back centuries or even millennia. If we think about the electrification that allowed us to be outside after dark in a more consistent way, and then have electronic appliances in our domestics and public spaces as well. We can think about like the use of TVs in public spaces to announce the bus or ads. So this incorporation of technology in urban space has been happening for a long time. We can think about media in urban spaces as well. The use of newspapers in our daily commutes many decades ago, and how now we are just like looking at our phones all the time as well. So thinking about how this technological change and advancements, they have been part of our city life for a while. And there were different concepts to address these relationships. In the 80s, we talked about informational cities. We had UB comps, media cities, communicative cities, autonomous cities more recently, and smart cities as well. So just to say there are different ways to try to frame this relationship. And smart cities actually smarter cities was like a term coined and branded by IBM in 2011. So it came from the private sector and lately was widely adopted by industry, governments, academia, and civil society organizations as well. And we see it everywhere. And sometimes we think it faded away, but then it's back. So we still are talking about mainly what we call datafication. That means the use of data, the datafication of everything. You probably heard about that before, and how data is everywhere these days, artificial intelligence, especially right now. So we all hear those words here and there in our everyday lives. So it's like part of the public debate right now. So thinking about smart cities specifically, we are probably talking about the use of large volumes of data, connected devices like sensors, trying to understand the patterns in our city, what's happening, also trying to predict behavior and natural disasters, for example, and also trying to make decisions quickly. Because sometimes like decision makers, they have to act quickly, and having this data available in real time makes a huge difference, especially in really large cities. So we also think usually the city is this like messy space, a little bit disorganized, lots of issues, conflicts emerging at the same time, and having like technology as a way to rationalize, organize, make it more efficient is really appealing. Hence the widely adoption of this smart city agenda, as I like to call, because it's a technical agenda, but also a policy agenda. It's being sold to cities and really sells this idea of making our urban environment more efficient, more like futuristic sometimes. And it kind of like draws from this imaginary of like a city of the future is like a technological city.
Great. Thank you for that context. That really helps. And can you describe smart cities then in the international context?
Yes, that's a good question because it matters for most countries these days. But indeed, as I said, it appeared as an industry definition over a decade ago, but it's everywhere these days. And even if we think about what we call these multi-stakeholder forums, when you hear about the United Nations discussing issues, making decisions, writing documents. So we have this very important document that's called the New Urban Agenda that was signed at Habitat 3, a United Nations conference in Quito, Ecuador in 2016. And this document is important because it will define and offer guidelines, like offer guidance to all countries in how to plan our cities for the next 20 years. So like we're envisioning the future of your cities for the next 2 decades or so. So it's very important, takes many years, lots of preparatory meetings, documents, policy issues to reach like what are the most urgent issues that we have right now to deal with. And the first one was signed in Vancouver in 1976. And after that, Istanbul 20 years later, 1996. And so this last one, for the first time in Quito, we were discussing the right to the city. That's like an older concept, over 6 years, that's basically saying that we need inclusivity, accessibility, and democracy in urban spaces. Like, what does it take to make our cities accessible for everyone? What are like the rights that we need, fundamental rights that we need to foster? And so this New Urban Agenda brought into the conversation this right to the city for the first time, but also for the first time we had smart cities included in one of the many articles of the document. It's the 66, if I'm not mistaken. And this was like highly criticized by academics and civil society organizations for bringing such an industry-focused concept into a document that's supposed to be there guiding us for 20 years. And unfortunately, it doesn't mention other issues related to technology like privacy or data protection. And so like there's a lot of work to be done that like it's there, just to say it's part of this internationalization process. And many of the companies providing smart cities services, they are transnational, meaning that they operate in different countries, different territories. We have this big expos and forums. If you follow the topic, probably heard about the Smart City Expo in Barcelona that just happened now in November. And also awards, cities with like the smartest city awards, and I'll get to that in a minute. And we also have all these international organizations like the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, discussing standards to measure smartness in cities. And we have rankings of the most smart cities in the world. And of course, no city wants to be known as the opposite of a smart city. So it's really appealing for local governments to say, like, we are the smartest cities in the United States or in Brazil or in Canada. So it's like, it creates this race to adopt certain technologies and like get into these forums, get into these spaces. And I spent years doing field work at this expo, seeing like what's being offered in terms of products and services, what are the companies, the transnational ones, and also participating in this kind of discussions, especially United Nations forums dedicated to either urban spaces or data in the last couple of years. So trying to understand these patterns of international negotiations about smart cities and urban space and technologies more broadly.
Okay, thank you. So why does this smart city agenda really matter here in the United States?
I'd say the United States is highly urbanized. If you think like about the urbanization rate is around 80%. Of course, it varies a lot according to the region of the country, the states. But let's think that it was 51.2% 100 years ago in 1920. So it's growing. We have so many people living in cities, and that per se is already a reason that we should care about cities and the adoption of technological solutions in urban spaces. It's going to affect a lot of people. That's my first concern in that. And we also have very specific challenge in terms of public infrastructure in the United States. If you think about transit, mobility, or the lack of public transit in many spaces, as we think about decarbonization and climate change, or electrification of our vehicles as well. So we do have really specific public infrastructure issues going on. Cities are affected by fires, floods, tornadoes. So thinking about all these external factors that are going to impact cities as well, we need a response that's usually quite quick. It must be really quick. So we can think about those issues as well, reliance on certain kinds of energy sources and how we are rethinking that to the future as well. Another aspect could be that we do have so many US-based companies offering smart city service, it came from IBM, and we have big players in this sector that are offering solutions to other countries around the world, not only the US. And we must start thinking about how we are planning for the next 10, 20, 50 years in the United States, in our cities, since we have so many people residing in those areas, and making good technological choice, because also the resources are finite. Local governments don't have that much money. Same for sometimes state governments. So how we are going to allocate this resource to purchase technology? Are we going to invest more in the public health realm, or in transit and mobility, or in infrastructure for technology and connectivity? So we have so many choices that must be made in the next couple of years as well. And making the right choice, prioritizing also the needs of the population is very important in this. I would say the US must prioritize an agenda for urban development and technology adoption that takes all these things into account.
Yes, I think, we've certainly undersourced infrastructure in our country for quite some time. So I certainly understand that. Mm-hmm. So what are the benefits and pitfalls of using technology in our cities? And maybe you could give us, as examples of specifically what those things are.
Okay. I would say we can start by really the utopian or dystopian ideas of smart cities, because every now and then we hear about this country or this company that aims to create and build the smartest city on earth from scratch. And we do have another example right now in Saudi Arabia. So these imaginaries of what the smart city of the future should be, and this dilemma, should we just kind of change our current cities into smarter cities, or is it worth building something from scratch and saying this is a smart city space? And there are countless examples about these efforts, especially the ones trying to build something from scratch. Is it possible to have something that's energy efficient, inclusive, accessible, and super green and clean for the future? And sometimes, often the answer is not yet. We're not there yet. So I keep mapping these efforts to see this is one part of the conversation. For the things that we already have here, I would say some benefits. We can think about the electrification now, low emissions electrical vehicles. How many governments are investing in that and offering incentives so people would buy electric cars instead of the fossil fuel ones. That's a trend in many different countries right now, but it's not enough. Going deeper into these issues, we can think about efficiency as well, even though this word is really tricky, can mean different things. But of course, we want our cities to be more efficient. If you ever live in big cities, you know how messy and chaotic it can be how difficult it is to manage millions of people inhabiting the same place. So, of course, it can help us. The use of sensors and predictability tools, like to try to predict when floods are going to happen, if that area is like prone to floods or other natural disasters, that could be like a good use. And we have good examples in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, for example, where I live, that we did have a good plan for a while from the operation center and try to contain, like predict, contain, and deal with floods in the city. And another thing that is really beneficial, of course, having data available is good for evidence-based policymaking. If we know the city in real time, if we have more information available to us as like policymakers, decision makers, academics, it's good, because then we could make better decisions based on whatever is available in front of us. But then there's like the other side of this as well. And there are like so many scholars dedicating their scholarship, trying to understand, okay, what are the pitfalls or the challenges or the issues that this kind of technology adoption in cities could cause. And I can start with even if like having more data can be seen as like always good. And in data science, we usually like want to have more data available to us. It's important to think about issues that are also everywhere these days, like talking about privacy, data protection, and also data invisibility. Not all communities are visible in the data sets that we have, even like census, official government numbers. The way to measure and count certain people in communities are not necessarily like a reflection of reality. And if you think about other countries as well, like how reliable this data collection process is sometimes. Another issue that probably everyone has heard about at some point is like surveillance and control. Concrete example is facial recognition technology that's kind of everywhere as well. The cases of false positives and wrongful arrest, when the technology says that the specific person is like committed something like a crime, and in the end it was not that person, just like a false positive, a mismatching of the databases. And we did have a few cases in the United States. There's like this global movement pushing for a moratorium or even a ban of facial recognition technologies in urban spaces, and like urging us to think about the consequences of using it in the private domain as well. Sometimes like with our phones or the banking app, like or to enter a stadium, like board planes in the United States as well. I've seen that recently. Some companies are using the pilot program to like board without a boarding pass. You just use your face. It's there. It's like everywhere, as I said. Like if you pay attention, you see, and it's different if it's used by a government or by a company. So we need to be very, very, very careful. I really suggest like whoever is listening to like look into this. There are like so many resources to think about like our privacy, our data protection, and our safety in relation to these technologies as well. And if you think about authoritarian governments, because sometimes I think like in democracies we have like a way to negotiate this the purchase and deployment of certain technologies, but I live it in different places, and I see that not always we have this kind of opportunity to participate in governmental decisions. And if you think about the use of these technologies in other like more authoritarian countries, that could be really harmful to the population as well, from journalists to activists to even academics as well. Maybe another example that is based also on field work that I did in Brazil for many years. We saw companies and especially consultancy firms drafting or like leading the governments in drafting municipal laws. So this lawmaking and policy-making process that's led by the consultancy firms selling the technology and the products not necessarily will be aligned with the priorities of the residents of the like local communities as well. And as I said, the funds are usually really strict or even unavailable. So governments really to make like really tough decisions on like what they prioritize in terms of investments and well-being of their communities. And there's like a lack of civic engagement in general, like how people can participate in the decision making process of this technology adoptions. Because if it impacts all of us, we should have a way of like participate and have a say in that, and that it's not always available in different places. But or it's just like send us an email or like give us a call, and not everyone will be able to do that. That's why it's important sometimes before, let's say, if a city really wants to implement like facial recognition technology in public space, it should consult local communities, advocacy organizations to see like what are the potential problems we are going to face here, especially in places with lots of inequalities as well. So I would say it's very important to bring people in, like bring the voices that are not heard in this process as much as we can to ensure that like our democratic processes are still in place.
Great, thank you. That gives us a lot to think about and to ask our government officials about. So thank you. And finally, can you describe the connection between smart cities and climate justice?
Yes, and this is good timing as we have the United Nations Conference of the Parties starting next week, also known as the Climate Change Conference, that this year, ironically, it's going to be in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, country that relies a lot on oil and fossil fuels in general. So it's an interesting time to be discussing this. And if you follow this at the international level, the local level, regional level, you've seen this conversation finally catching up to the discussion of like technology in cities. I've seen over the years so many solutions being offered to governments as more sustainable. And sometimes this concept is really vague. Like, what are we talking about when we say something is sustainable? We are reaching a point in which like the temperatures are so high. Like last week in Rio, where I lived for many years, the temperatures were extremely high, as we never saw before. And then like we have all these accounts of like things are changing, actually, like how are we going to respond to this? And so there is this conversation at the international level, but also, of course, like governments and civil society organizations, scholars. At UVA, we have so many brilliant people thinking about the implications of like technology and climate in the environment. And we're finally thinking about this, like within smart cities and artificial intelligence, big data, what are like the consequences and the connections between these topics, for example. And we do have over 30 mega cities in the world right now, meaning cities with over 10 million people. So this number is growing. And we have cities like Tokyo with over 35 million people in the same space. Or even Sao Paulo, where I also live, at over 22 million right now in the metropolitan space. So it's like kind of like unimaginable to think, imagine the kinds of challenge that we face already and then we will face in the coming years as well. And think the impacts of these mega cities are important, but also like the small cities, mid-sized cities, like thinking beyond the mega cities, because usually I see a lot of focus on like the capital cities, really big ones, but then like thinking about like the small and mid-sized that often don't receive as much media attention or investments from governments, like how are they going to like be resourceful and address all these really pressing issues in terms of climate justice as well. And something that I'm really interested these days is to think about the impact of data science and our practice in climate justice as well. If we think about all the data centers, the supercomputers being built in Europe and in other places as well, and generative AI, that's like the talk of the moment. How are these infrastructures and practice impacting climate? Like one company that's like one of the leading companies in generative AI, in their reports, they mentioned like the consumption of water resources increased a lot since they deployed the technology. And like data centers require certain temperatures and electricity consumption as well. So this these advancements, they also have like an impact that sometimes is not really visible, or we don't necessarily connect the dots. But this is an area that I think like deserves way more attention. And it's something that I want to look into in the near future as well.
Great, thank you. So thank you so much, Professor Reia, for sharing all of this information about your work and your research. You've given us a lot to think about. And as you've mentioned, we need to think about our privacy and our security in regard to our data, and think about our governments and what they're doing with that. And so I appreciate this context very much. And also, I think climate is such an important, if not the most important issue right now. So thank you for that context. I really appreciate it. So I appreciate you sharing your knowledge and expertise with UVA's alumni, friends, and families. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate this opportunity.
And thank you all for listening. For upcoming podcasts and other lifetime learning programming, recordings, and blogs, please visit our website at engagement.virginia.edu/learn. You can also find our podcasts on the Virginia Audio Collective, which is a network of UVA podcasts hosted by WTJU Radio and can be found at virginiaaudio.org. So thanks again, and we look forward to you taking part in future lifetime learning programs.